On the very first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they prepared and went into the tomb.
They found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance, so they went in, but they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus.
While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them.
The women were terrified and bowed with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them,
"Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen.
Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee?
The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised to life."
Then they remembered his words, so they rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened.
Well, once again, everybody, happy Easter. Man, how exciting. What a joy it is to be with you today to celebrate what is a really, really special day. You already know this, okay? But this holiday really is very little about bunnies and chocolate, both of which are great, but much more about one of the most incredible stories, the most incredible thing that's ever happened in human history. A dead man walked out of a grave. And if you are here today and that is hard for you to believe, or you have some questions or doubts about the whole Jesus thing, or especially the dead man walking part, I get that. I'm so glad that you are here. This kind of story doesn't really always fit easily in our brains, because most of the time when people pass, that's it, right? We don't see them again. And I heard a story about a traveling pastor years ago who would often go to little, small, rural communities where they didn't have very many churches. And he would go there and he would do funeral processions or funeral services for folks after someone passed away. And he would meet up with the local funeral director, and they would drive together in the funeral home's hearse, and they would go to the location whatever little community where this funeral was going to be held. And one time, these two who had partnered together a bunch of times doing funerals together, they were on their way back from a funeral, back to where they meet up, and the pastor started feeling really tired. And he kind of wanted to close his eyes and doze off for a minute. He wasn't able to fall asleep in the passenger seat, and he thought, well, I'm in a hearse. There's nobody in the back. So maybe if I just go back there and lay down for a little bit, no, it's not going to bother anybody, right? And the funeral director's like, go for it. Yeah, have at it. So maybe a little creepy, but he was pretty tired, okay? So he soon goes back, crawls into the back, lays down in the back, nods off. Pretty soon the funeral director realizes he needs gas. So he pulls off into a small town gas station, didn't think anything of it. And it was back in the day in a small town where there was a full service attendant. And the guy walks out and asks him what to do, fill her up, puts the gas tank in, starts pumping gas, and looks in the window and sees a guy laying there, right? He noticed the body stretched out in the back, which kind of freaked him out, even though it was I guess that's normal. But he seems kind of uncovered. I don't know what's going on there. But it got worse when at that moment, his engine stopped and everything. The pastor wakes up from his nap, kind of rubs his eyes and stretches out a bit, sees the attendant and just waves at him, And this is a true story. And the attendant at the gas station took off running back into the gas station. And who can blame him, right? I mean, the thing is, when people see life where they were expecting death, they don't quite know where to put that. There are 2 people in Scripture that had a bit of a similar reaction after Jesus rose from the dead on that very first Easter. I want to share a story with you from Luke chapter 24 in the Bible, Luke 24. And it begins in verse 13. And this is what it says in Luke 24:13. This is Easter Sunday, the very first one. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" And they stopped short, sadness written across their faces. We find out a little bit later that these were followers of Jesus. John's gospel tells us that they're a couple. One of them is a wife. Her name is Mary. She was there at Jesus' cross, like during the time when he was being crucified. This is not his mother Mary, but another Mary. And the husband's name is Cleopas. He also was a believer in Jesus. And that was yesterday, because now the whole thing has gone up in flames. Verse 15 says they talked and they discussed. But that doesn't quite capture potentially the weight of those words. In the original language, Luke uses a word that's probably better translated, disputed. It could have maybe even been an argument. So there it is, friends, in the Bible 2,000 years ago. Even then, married couples, even the ones who follow Jesus, sometimes have discussions when they don't agree on something, okay? We don't know exactly what they had tension about or what was exactly going on in their conversation, but imagine what it must have been like for them. Like they had put their full hope in Jesus, the Messiah, the one who was going to bring this great hope and this great change to their nation and even to the entire world. And man, just like that, everything is gone. Everything they had put their hope in was gone. They probably were walking alongside on this road with other people also. Periodically, people walk up next to them. They're all passing, going out of the city after a festival. It wasn't weird at all for other people to pass by. And then Jesus shows up. And Jesus wasn't being nosy exactly. He's kind of just casually passing by and making small talk. God keeps them from recognizing him as Jesus. And so they start talking with him like they would anybody else who's leaving the city. They're just having a conversation. Then in verse 18, one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in all of Jerusalem who hasn't heard about the things that have happened there in the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. And this all happened 3 days ago." Okay, Cleopas, maybe not the nicest response to this stranger, okay? Like, you're the only person, but give him a break. After all, have you ever had a moment in your life where you were a little more pointed with your words than you intended because your stress level was real high? No? Okay, good. Just me. They've been going through a lot, okay? Understandably, they're disappointed. And here's the first reality that we can pull from this story, friends. Jesus doesn't disregard your disappointment. He understands it. If you go through seasons of your life where you're disappointed, Jesus understands. Sometimes, man, it is hard to see past hopelessness, isn't it? I mean, it just seems like there is no way forward. I don't see anywhere I can step to make things better. And that was just a few days ago for this couple. Things were good. For them, it looked like the answer was before them. The Messiah had come. Everything seemed to add up, man. Jesus fit all the blanks. He filled in all the spaces, and he looked the part. He was right there at the right time, but that was 3 days ago. I mean, everybody could feel it. He spoke with authority. He spoke with power. Even the teachers of the law listened to him, but that was 3 days ago. He had power, even power to perform miracles. But that didn't last either, because that was 3 days ago. Hope died 3 days ago. And you have to understand why they were so completely devastated. We get to look at this story and all the other stories like this in the Bible. Literally on this side of the resurrection, we get to come together and celebrate Easter. We're having a party. But that was not their experience. No one involved expected that Jesus was actually going to die. And not just die, but be arrested and hung on a cross. I mean, Rome put an exclamation point on the death of rebels by crucifying them in front of everybody. The cross was a declaration to everybody who passed by. This guy, whoever he said he is, and whatever he did, beware, they didn't get away with it. They're not going to win. If he says he's the Messiah, he's not. And the followers of Jesus didn't know what to do with that. I mean, they must have been saying things like, we used to believe We used to have joy around Jesus when he was arrested. Even then, we still had some hope. I mean, maybe he'd break free, or maybe he would like usher some heavenly power and take everybody out. We had hoped that when he was arrested that it wouldn't get ugly. But as soon as he was convicted, they started beating him. They started mocking him. And then they marched him up that hill to the cross. And in humiliation, they nailed him on a cross for crucifixion. And he just let them. We had hoped that he really was the answer, but all of it was a farce. We stuck with him to the very end. But now, that was 3 days ago. He's dead. It's all over. And as they watched him on the cross, as the last little bit of life slipped away from Jesus, their hope slipped away with him. You know, in the story that we're looking at, I imagine that they sort of roll their eyes at this guy that they don't know who he is, right? Is he being serious? Like they're so disillusioned that Cleopas is borderline rude. You must be the only person in this entire... Were you under a rock for the last 3 days? Like you must be the only person that doesn't know what has happened here. At the very heart of this story are 3 huge words in verse 21. And these are the 3 words we've been talking about. We had hoped. We had hoped. And maybe you've been there, where you felt like in your life you were on the right track, or things were starting to come together, and maybe you were really embracing your walk with God when for whatever reason hope was kind of pulled out from under you, or there was a season when faith was real for you, but for some reason it just kind of slipped away. We had hope. And if you go through life for very long at all, those words are bound to become a part of your story. We had hoped. We had hoped that we could just raise a great family with awesome kids, and then the doctor gave us the news. We had hoped. We had hoped of this incredible dream of retiring early, and then I lost my job. I could never get over feeling like such a failure. We had hoped. We had hoped of how things were going to end up, but then our kid chose a path that we never thought they would go down, and it just totally crushed us. I had hope, but then for some reason I just couldn't shake the habit, and it's got me in its grip, and now it has become a huge problem. I had hope, but just when I thought that we were taking a positive turn in our relationship, he or she said, "I don't love you anymore." I had hoped that maybe the whole Jesus thing really was worth putting my whole life into, but then the doubt kept creeping in, some things happened, and I just couldn't do it. And maybe your story is similar to one of those. If you live very long, you run into disappointments. Disappointments in other people who have let you down. Disappointments even sometimes in yourself. Disappointments with God. And the resurrection, friends, is a reminder that disappointment is not only understandable, disappointment is part of the story. But there is hope on the other side. The reality for the 2 on the road that day was that despite the disappointments that they felt, there was a great hope that they had yet realized. In fact, although they didn't know fully what Jesus had just done, they had heard some stories. In fact, the story continues in verse 22 of Luke 24 this way, as they're telling Jesus what they heard. Some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. You know what? Maybe on this side of the resurrection, some of us will say, like, of course that's what happened. Have you not heard the Easter story before? Like, of course that's what. Well, yeah, for us, maybe we know that. But remember, resurrection was not something that was exactly an everyday occurrence. This was a brand new idea, okay? And even though Jesus had told them that he was going to be raised from the dead, it just didn't register. They couldn't believe it. They didn't have anywhere to put that. After all, death is death. Now, earlier in Luke 24, if you read back, we are told that They didn't believe the women that found the tomb. They didn't believe them because what they were saying sounded like such complete nonsense. What do you mean he's missing? And maybe you felt that before. The whole empty tomb thing, or even the church thing, or walking with Jesus thing, it just is really hard to find a place for. I get that. More importantly, actually, Jesus gets that. In fact, another reality for us as we're walking through this story is that Jesus does not dismiss your doubt. He resolves it. He doesn't dismiss doubt. While disappointment can be more often of an emotional response, doubt is oftentimes more of an intellectual response. Things just don't seem to add up for one reason or another. Maybe you felt that way before with Jesus. I'm not saying that every question or doubt that you've ever heard has a one sentence, slam dunk answer. Not that. This is a relationship that we're invited into, and relationships often don't work that way. What I'm saying is that when you walk with Jesus, he helps open your eyes to things that were previously kind of cloudy, or perhaps you were downright blind to and just could not see. He doesn't just have the answers. Friends, this is so important. He doesn't just have the answers. He is the answer. He himself is the answer for all of life's pressing questions. He did that with these two in our story. In fact, look at verse 25. Verse 25, Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" And then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from the scriptures the things concerning himself. Well, where did really nice and patient Jesus go? Doesn't he say, now he's kind of maybe being a little rude? No, he's not exactly being rude. He's not insulting them. He is pointing them to a very critical point. Important details of this story. Notice he ends up taking them all the way through the Bible, which they probably already knew, all the way up to the resurrection, and pointed out things that for one reason or another they had missed. Despite their doubts, Jesus showed them that the evidence was there, and he walked patiently through the story with them. God had a plan from the very beginning.